I do not know how it comes about, but if you sit opposite a man every day and you're engaged in fighting him, you cannot help getting a liking for him, whether he deserves it or not. That was Arthur Balfour after the 1906 election, in which the Conservative Party was reduced to 156 seats, the lowest in its history. A few days on, a few days to go until polling day. Rishi Sunak is set to beat that record. But just how bad is it going to get for the Conservatives? And what will a Starmer supermajority look like? I've got with me a special guest today. He's been on the show once or twice before. He's campaigned quite vigorously these elections, and he's a big fan of electoral maps. So welcome to the show, Jake.
Yeah, good to be back once again.
And just before we start, what's been the feeling around the doors when you've been knocking and campaigning across this campaign?
Well, it's obviously the predominant thing, regardless of what type of voter you end up speaking to, the lion's share have all been they've had enough of the Tories. 14 years, they look and they can't really see an improvement. So they look at schools, healthcare, they look at the roads, they look at the railways. Everything has just gone downhill in what feels like managed decline.
Hmm.
And what have we got for that? We've had all of our public services get worse, and in exchange, we're paying the most taxes in how 85% of people's lifetimes. So it's really just becoming crystal clear that people think it's time to call time, essentially,
And
and have a
you,
change.
you've been campaigning in Windsor, one of those seats, traditionally Conservative seat. What's been the feeling amongst traditionally Conservative voters?
Well, funny enough, we went when I went out, we were campaigning just outside the centre of Windsor, and I think we found maybe two Conservative voters in
Hmm.
about 150 conversations. No, see, it's not the most representative of that seat on the whole, because the more Tory areas of the seat are when you go to places like Ascot. But what we've seen a few things, like using Windsor as an example, is I say the boundary changes. And the boundary changes, I think, are going to make quite the difference at this election because,
Okay.
again, using Windsor as an example, we've seen a lot of places around Bracknell have been moved out of the Windsor constituency, and they have been replaced with Englefield Green and Virginia Water out of Runnymede and Langley in Slough. So what we've seen with Windsor as an example is we've seen quite a few Tory areas moved out, and then we've seen some Labour areas moved in. And what that means is we've essentially found that Windsor now is a seat that Labour can win.
Oh
And
wow.
very much that's what we've been hearing on the doors. We've found quite a few voters on the doors when I was there who were, saying they were going to vote for Labour because they could see, the numbers, the tactical voting websites, etc., are all saying to vote for Labour. And I think that's something else that's going to be very prevalent at this election is tactical voting. And
What about Keir Starmer himself? Are people warm to him, or is this just a case of an anti-Tory vote?
I think a lot of it is people just don't have an opinion on him, which I
Okay.
think is actually a good thing for him. Because obviously, when you look at the past 10, at least of the past 14 years, we've had Scottish independence referendum, 2015 election, and then Brexit, Johnson, Truss. Sunak. And I don't think a week has gone by where you've not had at least one or two big political things on the news where this person's done this person's done that. Party lead, prime minister's got another issue. And I think the thing with Keir that some people notice now, some people probably notice further along, is he's going to be bland in a good way. If he's prime minister, what you'll see is you won't have, BBC headline, prime minister compares, this is using something Boris did when he was, I think, foreign secretary, compares Muslim women to letterboxes. You're not going to have the constant thing of, Tory MP watches Tractor adult film material, isn't immediately suspended. You're going to see a step change in the way politics is treated from the very top of bringing back a seriousness. And I think some people are
The
seeing that already with Keir, but I think quite a lot of people are more likely to see that after the election, once he's been in, for 6 to 12 months, and we'll go, hang on, he's not the most rambunctious fellow like Mr. Farage. However, he's getting the job done. And I think a lot of people, honestly, are sick of having politics on the TV every other minute of every other day.
So let's look at the numbers themselves. So we'll start with the Conservatives. As I mentioned before, the lowest seat total they've had is 156, with under Alpha Balfour in 1906. How bad is it going to get for the Conservatives on Thursday?
It is a difficult question to answer because obviously we don't know, because it can go two ways very easily. Like, it could either be, a far worse defeat than even 1906. Like we're seeing on models, the New Statesman Britain elects model as of yesterday had them down at 90. As of literally this morning when we're recording, Election Maps UK has the Tories down to 80. So we're seeing at the minute these projections of really quite drastic Tory defeats. But then you go into some of these seats that the Tories are projected to lose, seats like Bexhill and Battle, 675 vote projected majority. Bury St Edmunds, Labour projected to gain by less than 600. West Suffolk, Labour projected to gain by less than 1,000. There's an awful lot of seats
Which
where,
are in the balance.
yeah, that the Labour's is only really taken from the Tories because of the huge reform vote. On Election Maps UK, Exmouth and Exeter East is projected to go to Labour by 11 votes. And I think the issue is purely down to how many people vote tactically and how many people do the Tories lose to reform. Because if the Tory vote holds up, say, even just 2 or 3% better nationally, that could save them in 40, 50, 60 seats. It's so tight in so many seats that I think we genuinely have to just wait and see how people go and vote, because it's so close. Like seats like Sajid Javid's seat, Andrea Leadsam's seat, another big examples of, Tory Stonewall safe seats where they're projected to have their vote share cut in half. And it's a case of how realistic is that actually on polling day? Essentially, like, yes, that's what the models are saying, but what we might see that we can't see yet is seats like South Northamptonshire, formerly Andrea Leadsom seat as an example, the Tories might not drop half of their vote share, which is 32.7% of the seat vote in that seat. But what we might then see is in a seat, that was in the red wall, like just give an example of Mansfield, it might drop more like 40-50% to more 2005 2010 levels. We don't yet know the exact geography of where the Tory losses are in votes. And I think that's what's purely going to decide how many seats they come out with. Because if they lose the votes in seats that they don't already hold, and that's where the bigger bleeding is, in seats that Labour won, if there's a bigger Tory bleed there, that could actually save the Tories by the end nationally. It's very in flux.
In several polls, Reform have actually overtaken the Conservatives. In some polls, even they're several points ahead. And the election that everyone has alluded to is Canada 1993, when coincidentally the Reform Party, the right-wing populist party, overtook the traditional centre-right Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party ended on 2 seats by the end of the night. Looking at some of the polling ranges, so I think it looks like the worst case scenario for the Tories, it could be around the 50 seat mark. Best case scenario around 120, 130 if we're taking polling aggregates. So what happens to the party post-election in the best case scenario and the worst case scenario?
Yeah, so obviously I definitely don't think we are at Canada 93, purely because I feel like the thing we have in this country that's a bit different to how it was in Canada, for instance, is, the Reform Party vote in Canada was very heavily concentrated, in the western half of the country. So there was places in, I think it's Alberta, where they won every single seat. They were building up to something like 50, 60, 70, 80% of the vote in those seats. I don't think Reform's anywhere near doing that level of damage to the Tories here. I think it's very much going to be that what we see instead is the Reform vote is so spread out, because I say a lot of it is the former UKIP and Brexit Party vote. And also, as we saw in 2015, how inefficient the UKIP vote was. I think, again, the Reform Party vote, is going to be just as inefficient.
Okay.
So I feel like that's going to hold the Tories above water through the election. However, post-election, obviously the Tories are going to have what I can only really think best to describe as an existential crisis. Because if we look at, I'll use the Election Matters UK one because that's the heaviest Tory loss. Just on immediate glance, I can only see so there's members of the cabinet who actually hold on to their seats. There's only really Rishi Sunak, Oliver Dowden, Kemi Badenoch, James Cleverly. We're going to see an awful lot of the cabinet who haven't stood down wiped away.
Yeah.
A lot of them who've been talked about as potential leadership material, past and present. People like Jeremy Hunt, people like Grant Shapps, even people like Mel Stride.
Penny Mordaunt as well.
Is predicted to be wiped out. Who, sorry?
Penny Mordaunt is likely
Penny
to lose her
Mordaunt.
seat.
She's likely to be wiped out. We're seeing a lot of the big names who are set to be wiped out, and that essentially leaves I think, two choices for the Tories. They've either got someone like Tom Tugendhat is one option, who is obviously more in the One Nation. People like Tom Tugendhat, and I'd say even James Cleverly and Oliver Dowden, who are very much on the more middle ground of the party at the
Yeah.
moment. It will be them, or it will be someone like Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, or I don't think we can rule it out, Liz Truss. You
Well,
know, and
just
if
before you continue, actually, I have the next Tory leader odds right in front of me, and currently Kevin Badenoch is the clear favourite, 3-1. You got Tom Tugendhat at 6-1, Priti Patel 7-1, James Cleverly 8-1, Nigel Farage now 9-1, Penny Mordaunt 9-1, and Suella Braverman 10-1. Everyone else is double figures.
yeah, so it was very much a clear choice. If it's someone like Suella, especially Kemi less so, but someone of that Tory right, I think there's every chance that they then do pull back reform, and maybe even we see some of the people, quite a few of the people who've moved from the Tories to reform, particularly more on the grassroots and council level, might well move back to the Tories. But equally, I think if they do, the challenge they then have is someone like Kemi or Suella, or even, as you say, Farage, who is 9-1. If someone like them became leader, that would neutralize very much, neutralize the reform threat, but then that would magnify, I think, the Lib Dem threat. But equally, someone like, especially Tom Tugendhat, would probably neutralize the Lib Dem threat, but given he was much more pro Remain, that would probably then, bolster the reform threat. So it seems like right now the Tories are stuck when it comes to choosing their next leader, quite literally between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, yeah.
There's not really anywhere for them to move to. No matter which way they go, they are in trouble. They will have a leader of one side of the party who will struggle to keep the other side, because I've
Well, what's
seen
left of it
talk.
anyway.
Yeah, because I've seen talk from a few people who are of the more, One Nation element, and there's a genuine belief that if someone like Suella Braverman became leader and, welcomed Nigel Farage in, or something of that nature happened, then there is a concern that quite a few moderate One Nation Tory MPs will up and walk over to the Lib Dems or
Okay.
into their own new party. So there's a real risk, I think, regardless of who they pick, that the Tories split into. I think the issue they had was obviously 2019, they had one of the broadest political coalitions we've seen at a general election. They had a coalition of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Tilly Anderson, you know,
Well,
to
I
people
think
like,
I think Collingwood made a very good analysis. He said essentially there's three factions in the Conservative Party. You've got the Cameroons, who are essentially, as you said, the One Nationers, who are a bit Blairite, but slightly more Eurosceptic and more pro austerity. You've got your Thatcherites, who are pro Brexit but pro deregulation Brexit, such as your Liz Truss, your Jacob Rees-Mogg, and then you had the newcomers, the Red Wall Tories, who were maybe more centrist on the economy and a lot more right wing
yeah,
on culture, such as your Miriam Cates type figure.
Yeah. And I think that's where the problem for the Tories in lies this election. Because normally, you can look to past elections, and normally a party, when it's in government and it's coming out, it's normally because it's lost one core group of voters. In 97 and 2010 for both Labour and the Tories, it was they'd lost that middle ground, middle class sort of voter. Whereas I think the issue the Tories have now is things like Partygate and such have cost them the red wall voter that they'd gained at 2019. The fact that Brexit happened has cost them a lot of those Cameroon Europhile voters in the south.
Yeah.
And then because Brexit's not been done properly, in the minds of many, has cost them that hard Thatcherite Eurosceptic vote in places like the south east of England and the East Midlands. So I think the existential crisis for the Tories is, who do they actually represent now? Because, the three big voter groups that brought Boris in with such a large majority, they have alienated large chunks of all three groups, and they are losing large chunks of all three groups. They don't have that core demographic they can fall back on that John Major had. And I think that's the likely death now.
Well, I'm looking at the Republican Party in France, actually, and I'm seeing almost the fate of the Tories there, where so the Republican Party are the equivalent of the Tories in France, your traditional centre-right party. When Emmanuel Macron burst onto the scene, that came at the same time as the increase in popularity of the National Front, or now known as the National Rally. And essentially the Republican Party had this same existentialist crisis where essentially their more centrist MPs were all leaving them for Macron's party, and a lot of the more right-wing ones, maybe they weren't changing party, but they were trying to push the party in that more right-wing direction. And it's got to the point now where actually the leader, or the president of the party, Eric Ciotti, just came out and said he wanted a right-wing alliance with the National Rally, and that has completely split the party in two. So in this coming election, you have the Republican Party, which is basically just the centrist MPs left running independently, but you now have so the official list of the National Rally is the National Rally plus right-wing Republicans. So the party is literally split into two, with the centrist MPs getting closer to Macron and the right-wing MPs moving towards the National Rally. It'd be interesting to see if something similar would happen to the Conservative Party in the coming years.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that is their danger. It is. We've sort of seen that happen with the Tories. I think with the influx of, as you've previously mentioned, people like Miriam Cates. When you look at the party under David Cameron in 2010, 2015, someone like Miriam Cates would never have been a parliamentary candidate with party support. Because Cameron was very much pushing that social liberalism angle. Someone like Miriam Cates would have been deemed unacceptable, I think, by CCHQ. Whereas now it feels like someone like Miriam Cates is the expectation for a lot of Tory candidates. And we've sort of seen it in real time. I think with Conservatives, we've definitely seen the Overton window of the Conservative Party shift rightward. Especially, I think, since the 2017 election. I think that's when it almost accelerated quite heavily. But I think it's not dissimilar from under Thatcher. See, if you compare the Conservative Party of 79, for instance, Conservative Party of 87, it moved a lot more rightward. There always seems to be, with the Conservatives, a rightward shift when they're in government. And I feel like the issue they've had this time is they've had the rightward shift, but there hasn't also been a rightward shift in the country to match, like there was with Thatcher when she essentially, created a new norm in politics. I don't think we've seen the Tories manage to do that this time. So they've moved rightward, but they haven't brought the country with them.
Well, with the rise of reform, could we not argue that the public has actually gone more right wing than the Tories?
I think it's a tricky one, to be honest, there, because in one sense, yes, you could definitely make a convincing argument on that basis. But equally, we're seeing reforms not really translating it. They're getting this vote increase, which is, I'll say, quite good for them. However, it's not going to translate into much of any influence. So how relevant will it be in the long term if, this many votes translates into just, say, 3 seats? How long would it be until we end up with essentially just what happened to UKIP happening again, of that right-wing vote just naturally transitioning back into the Conservatives?
So before we move on to Labour, I wanted to look at a few best bets for the Conservatives. Are there any seats which you believe could be a surprise? So either a surprise that the Tories hold on to it, or a surprise that the Tories may lose it?
So honestly, I feel like in terms of a surprise seat that the Tories may lose, that's actually quite a hard one because obviously at the height of Liz Truss, we had those MRP polls come out that suggested, the Conservatives were down to 3 seats. So I think in the traditional sense of a surprise defeat, pretty much every single seat has been speculated as a loss for the Conservatives. But I think definitely seats that if they do lose, regardless of the card, I think will be surprising. I say Rishi Sunak's seat in Richmond, which obviously drawing again to our earlier parallel of 1906, Arthur Balfour, that was the last time a Tory leader had lost their seat, and I think
Manchester East, it was.
yeah, it was Ardwick essentially. And I feel like technically it's weird because of how it was then, but he was essentially the incumbent prime minister and lost his seat. And I think if that happens with Rishi, that's also going to be seismic. But then another seat that I'm looking at is obviously, if we remember when the North Shropshire by-election happened, at the time that was the longest held Tory seat in the country.
Okay.
That seat, the seat that now holds that distinction is Goole and Pocklington in Yorkshire, which is David Davis's seat.
Okay.
And I think if the Tories lose a seat like Goole and Pocklington with someone like David Davis, who's been there for, the best part of 40 years now, I think. He's been there. I've just double check. I think it was 83 he was elected. So
Well, couldn't tell
1987.
you,
So he's
unfortunately.
been there since for 37 years. So I think if someone like David Davis loses a seat like that he's had for that long, I think that's definitely a shock. And it also shows how damaged the Tory brand is, that
Yeah.
even, being a long-term, quite well-liked incumbent
Yeah.
can't save you anymore at that point.
Well, the odds for both of those. So for the Tories to lose Richmond to Labour, 7-4, and for Labour to win Goole and Pocklington, 13-8. So the Tories are still favourites there, but
Yeah,
the odds have narrowed more and more as we've got closer to polling day.
absolutely. And then I think the thing also to watch out for that I think models will struggle to pick up is Scotland. And I
Yeah.
think it's not impossible that we could actually see potentially a couple of Conservative gains in Scotland
Okay.
in seats like Perth and Kinrossshire and Moray West, Nairn and Strathspey, because I feel like the Tory vote there could hold up purely on the basis of it is a tactical vote to
Hmm.
begin with in a lot of parts of Scotland. So whilst we might see a lot of voters in England or Wales who are going to move from the Conservatives to Labour, I feel like in quite a few parts of Scotland, they are going to stick with the Conservatives purely because the Conservatives are the way to beat the SNP.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think for quite a lot of voters in Scotland, I say the SNP are the two evils almost.
Hmm.
So I think definitely also watch out for potential surprise Tory gains in Scotland,
Okay.
because the Tories could have their Putney in Scotland, as it were. See, Labour absolutely destroyed last time across the country, but gained Putney. We could see something similar with the Conservatives, where across England and Wales they have an absolute bloodbath, but somewhere in Scotland they could pull a gain out of a hat.
Very interesting. My only value I found was the Conservatives to hold Chichester. I think it will be pretty close, but with the majority they have, I think they just hold on. And it was 2-1. It was. I think it was too good a value to miss out on.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're going to see seats like that. What's going to be interesting to see is, for instance, Labour's on about 14-15% there in 2019. How much of that moves to the Lib Dems on a basis of just wanting rid of the Conservatives? That's what is going to determine it, I think, and is going to be really hard to see until declarations happen.
Okay, so let's move on to Labour now. So if the Tories are going to be reduced to rubble, then what does a Starmer supermajority look like? Um, so first of all, how many seats do you think Labour will finish on by the end of Thursday? Um, yeah, what sort of range are we looking at?
I think 400 is probably going to be the sort of median. I feel like the issue is it could shift so heavily either way. I think Labour could be at the minute as low as 390, 380. But equally, because of the reform vote factor, we could definitely see, as quite a few MRPs have indicated, 440, 450, perhaps even 460. We've got a real wide range because, in part, we're seeing Labour is truly competitive in seats that they either have never won or they have not won for 80 years. To give a good example, a seat like Derbyshire Dales, which is projected to go to Labour by about 4% on Britain elects. Your run-of-the-mill, safe, heavily Tory seat, isn't it? Labour last won that in the form of West Derbyshire in 1945, where they won it by just 156 votes. So we're seeing seats like that coming into play. We're seeing seats like Tatton come into play. Even seats like West Suffolk on Britain elect models are in play. Even sounds great to say, but even seats like Suffolk Coastal are in play.
Oh, wow.
Central Devon is in play. Bexhill is in play. Folkestone is in play. There's a possibility that Labour wins the seats of so many previous Tory leaders. Because if we look at Britain elects, for instance, for previous Tory leaders, Labour's looking at winning Michael Howard's seat, Margaret Thatcher's seat,
Oh,
John
wow.
Major's seat. We're looking at big name former Tory leaders, seats that were thought of, apart from Thatcher's, as pretty safe. Labour's just turning up and going, hello, thank you very much. And I think what we could even see is obviously we've seen the stories of Labour HQ have shut off access to some canvassing data and such in less winnable seats and have not put the effort into those seats, but they could still win them just on the back of the national mood shift.
Well, it reminds me of Boris Johnson's first local elections, or the first local elections after the general election victory. There were some Tory paper candidates who were waking up, finding out they'd won the election, which they hadn't even planned to become a councillor.
Exactly, and I think there is every chance we see the same thing happen with Labour at this election. And I feel like that won't necessarily pose a problem for Keir Starmer, but it might pose more of a problem for Sir Alan Campbell as the chief whip. Because I say, if say Labour gets to even just 400 seats, that means that overnight the size of the parliamentary party will have doubled overnight. And I think that will be a challenge much more for the whips than Keir himself, because I see the whips will then have to try and keep order across a much, much larger
Coalition.
coalition and parliamentary party.
I was I was interested to ask you as well. So let's say they win their supermajority. How stable is that coalition? Because I could imagine a couple of years' time, you could potentially have the more left wing of the party going towards the Greens. You could potentially have frustrated red wall voters turning towards reform. And then maybe there are Remainers who have expectations of Starmer getting closer with the EU. If that doesn't happen, possibly they turn to the Lib Dems. Just how stable is this supermajority or coalition if it were to come into fruition?
Yes, so I feel like there's a few different things because I think obviously within the parliamentary party, um, there is a very tight discipline. We've seen a lot of the more problematic MPs for the leadership have gone, be that through walking away or being deselected. And I feel like we will see definitely quite a strong grip in the parliamentary party. I feel like how stable it is, I think depends on the Conservatives more than anything. Because I see we're seeing Labour will be winning a lot of these seats on the basis of the Tory reform split. And if we look at 2001, for instance, Labour held on to its huge majority massively. They lost just 6 seats in the 2001 election. So it's every possibility that we see that we get this Labour majority this election, and then come, say, 2029, the Tories and Reform are still splitting each other, so Labour walk in with a second heavy majority. I don't think that is actually an impossible scenario. And I think especially if we start to see by 2029 a turnaround in the country, we start to see the economy's improving, taxes are potentially coming down for most people, we're getting more out of the NHS, we'll be seeing a near enough fully nationalised railway again, and if that starts working for people, then I think a lot of people will stick with Labour probably at the next election. And I think, as we've mentioned earlier, we have been seeing some demographic shifts, I think accelerated by the last few years. Areas that I think we're going to start gradually moving away from the Conservatives, as we've sort of seen, the expansion of commuter town over time. I think a good example of that's a seat like Macclesfield, actually. It sits in Cheshire, just outside of Greater Manchester, and Labour's set to win that by 15%. And if Labour do well, with demographic shifts over time, we might see seats like Macclesfield become a lot more solid for Labour. And to look in places like Norfolk, seats that Labour's projected to only narrowly win at the minute, places like South Norfolk, Broadland and Fakenham, Mid Norfolk, these seats where you've got 2 or 3 quite large towns. I think we might, if we start seeing towns shifting more towards Labour, which I think could well be possible with the emphasis Labour's been putting onto high streets and small business, long term could see seats like that become a lot more winnable and reliable for Labour. And I think if that happens, we could very much see a new Labour coalition forming. As, maybe parts of the Red Wall, I think the best example to use would be somewhere like Ashfield, as places like that maybe, or Hartlepool maybe do, move over to Reform. Labour might be able to supplant those losses with places like Macclesfield, newly created seats like Mid Cheshire, maybe even seats like Selby. We might really start to see a redrawing of the map that holds better than Boris Johnson's did in 2019. I think a good example to use would be America. Like, if we look at the shifts we've seen in America in the Trump era, we've seen a lot of suburban districts in states like Virginia are a good example. Like, those Northern Virginia districts have gone from Republican suburban strongholds, in 2010, 2012, 2014, even 2016, to now they've shifted massively to the Democrats as, you get the suburban small C conservatives that are, they're fiscally lean, more slightly right wing, but they are much more socially liberal. As much as we've seen the Republican Party in America with Donald Trump lose those voters, I think the culture war is seeing the Conservatives in this country lose those same sorts of voters. And it feels like they are turning to Labour more than the Lib Dems. And we could see something like that happen here. So, in short, it all depends what Keir does. Because I also think, in terms of what Labour's going to do in government, we don't know yet, because I feel like the strategy has very much been under promise and over deliver. And I feel like there's a lot of things that Starmer is going to do that he's either not committed to at all, or he is currently saying, we're not going to
Hold
do.
back.
I think things like the two-child benefit, for instance, at the minute, yes, Labour has said we will not do them. However, there is every chance what we could then see happen is, if the economic situation improves decently in the next 2 to 3 years, we might then be in a position that, say, come the 2027 budget, Rachel Reeves is able to say, we are scrapping the two-child benefit cap. And we could well see there's a lot of things that Labour's not promising purely because they have no way of knowing how much of a detrimental position we will be in with the economy, and we don't want to promise anything we can't deliver, is the strategy.
Yeah.
Because I think they want to be able to stand at the next general election saying every promise was delivered.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably a really smart move, because I think one thing we have seen with the Tories is so much of that 2019 manifesto either not implemented or abandoned. When you look at things like HS2, I think is a big one. I say Boris was fully committed behind that. One of the first things Rishi did when he became Prime Minister was to get rid of it. He got rid of the ban on conversion therapy. He's very much rolled back a lot of the red wall appeal that Boris had made through levelling up. A lot of that has been completely gutted from the Conservatives. And I think Labour's being cautious to not fall afoul of the same error by only promising what they 100,000% know can be delivered.
So before we move on to the next party, I just wanted to look at a few value bets. So I'm looking at the seat bands. So the odds are quite interesting. So Labour to get between 400 and 449 seats, 13 to 8, and between 450 and 499 is 11 to 10. So currently the bookies have Labour winning around the 450 mark.
Yeah.
So are there any seats which you think Labour could win, which would be, I wouldn't say a big surprise anymore, but still a surprise. Even how the polls are shaping up, this will still be a wow, the Tories are toast.
Yeah, so to be honest, I think, with the exception of a couple seats like Macclesfield and Rushcliffe, where we have seen a sort of general gentle trend towards Labour, I feel like anywhere that Blair didn't win, that Labour do win, will be quite a seismic, indicative moment. So to sort of give some examples for that, it will be seats like Hayborough, seats like Mid Bedfordshire are looking possible for Labour. Seats like Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard. A lot of seats in central Norfolk and Suffolk. Seats like Congleton, Tatton, Edisbury, Ribble Valley, Fylde. As mentioned when we're discussing the Tories, the bookies aren't giving the Tories amazing odds even in seats like Goole and Pocklington. The odds aren't amazing even in seats like that for the Tories.
I'm looking now, and I mean, Tatton 1 to 3 for Labour, Fylde, Labour odds on favourites.
Yeah, seats like Salisbury.
Yeah, again.
Like looking at the Britain Elects model at the minute, for instance, in Wiltshire, Labour's projected to be the largest party because they're projected to, as well as Swindon, take Southwest Wiltshire, and to take Salisbury. The Labour's projected both seats in the Isle of Wight.
If they're taking Barber Jacket, Britain, then surely it's all over for the Tories.
Yeah, exactly, And then a few other instances like Windsor, I was down in. Windsor is neck and neck, with both Labour and the Tories on 25 to 30% each. That's looking very close. But then the seats like Bracknell and Aldershot, very much the home of the British Army in those areas. Labour councils, Labour looking to win seats like that. Seats like Basingstoke, Buckingham. We're looking at a lot of places that have always been written off for Labour that are actually looking like quite good chances for Labour. So we really can't say for certain, but I think if, we do see results come in from seats like North Somerset as a Labour gain, Salisbury as a Labour gain, places like Aldershot, Bracknell, potentially even Bexhill coming through as Labour gain, I think we are seeing something that we've truly never seen before in this country.
One interesting bet which caught my eye as well was Labour to receive fewer votes than they did in 2017, purely because the smaller parties are having much more of a breakthrough this election than they did.
Yeah. Because that's something that's actually worth mentioning, actually, I think. So in 2019, you had the sea of blue, but you could literally walk from, say, Land's End, up to the Scottish border, through entirely Conservative seats. You could get from North to South Wales through entirely Conservative seats. There's every chance now that you will not be able to do anything remotely similar to that. Like the longest stretch of Conservative seats is potentially going to be from Rutland to Brig, or from Goole to Richmond. You're not going to have these huge. Just you can go from the southwest into the southeast, up into the East Midlands to the West Midlands, to Yorkshire, to the northwest, to the northeast, through entirely Conservative seats. And I think we're going to, like, for instance, something unprecedented that is on the Britain elects model, for instance, is Labour winning every single seat in the northeast region.
Yeah.
Currently, we're looking at the northeast and the northwest potentially having 0 Conservative MPs between them. Britain elects currently has only 1 Conservative MP in all of Greater London. We're looking at seeing areas with just such massive shift in who has the seats there that a lot of results are just inherently shocking for that reason, it feels like at this point.
And moving on, is there a possibility that we wake up on Friday morning with Sir Ed Davey as the leader of the opposition?
I think there is a chance. It's definitely not exactly a massive chance. I wouldn't give it more than a 50% chance. But I feel like it's definitely something that cannot be ruled out. We look at the state of the country and the parties at the minute. We're seeing on some forecasts there's a gap of only 20 odd between the Tories and the Lib Dems. Some have the gap of single digits between the Tories and the Lib Dems. And I think the Lib Dems have actually had, I'd argue, the best campaign out of the 3 major parties, because Ed Davies managed to get onto the 6 o'clock news nearly every single day. Some people have criticised his stunts that he's been doing, but, they've been cutting through.
Mm,
You
mm.
know, like be that going water sliding,
Yeah.
paddle boarding. You know, like today he's doing a water aerobics class in a Lido or Lido, however you say it, in Cheltenham. You know, he was pottery painting in Hazel Grove. You know, he's been doing these things that have been getting him attention and are getting people thinking about the Lib Dems. And I think the thing that we've seen in the past that I think we will see again is the Lib Dems always have an incredibly efficient vote share.
In what sense?
Obviously, they don't need a lot nationally to get a lot of seats.
Mm.
You know, like nationally on vote share compared to 2019, they're currently polling at about the same. You know, they're polling at about 11, 12% still, but they're potentially going from 11 seats to 60 seats because their vote share their votes have become so efficient. And I
And
feel like that's
what
what makes the Lib Dems hard to gauge.
what are some of their key battlegrounds? Where have they been pouring their resources and campaigning into?
So, like, I'll use seats near me, for instance. So, a lot of Lib Dem effort in the north is focused on entirely on 4 seats. It's on keeping Tim Farron in Westmoreland and Lonsdale because that was tight. It's on Harrogate and Knaresborough, and then it's on Cheadle and Hazel Grove in Stockport as well. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning with Cheadle and Hazel Grove is in those seats and in that council, it is now one of only 2 councils in all of Greater Manchester, I believe, without a single Conservative, or it's one of 3, along with Wigan and the City of Manchester. You know, the Lib Dems have wiped the Tories out in those seats, you know, and they're looking at potentially 20% majorities in both of them, you know, because they've just done so much damage. And I think what we're seeing is the Lib Dems are capitalizing on the slow and steady gains that they've made over the past few years. Like if we look at the by-elections, obviously we know the typical rule of thumb is by-election gains don't always
Yeah,
translate,
of course.
which is fair enough. However, of the by-election gains in the last parliament, 3 of the 4 for the Lib Dems are projected to keep their seats in Cheshire and Amersham, in North Shropshire, and in Somerset. The
Which
only
one
one
of the?
they're not is in Honiton and Sidmouth, but
Okay.
even that is doable. You know, when we're really seeing the Lib Dems in the places where they've done well locally, it looks like they are set to have a really good night, potentially.
Hmm, hmm. Well, I have a few of my best bets for the Lib Dems actually. I've backed them to win Brecon, Radnor, and
Tar.
Wimtor. That's it. They were 10-3 when I got on them. I believe they're now evens. And then I also got on them to win Cheshire and Amersham when it was evens. Now I believe they're 1-4.
Yeah.
So are there any seats which you would think would be what you'd call the bellwether seat if early on in the night they're projected to win it? That's going to be a great night for them. What seats are we looking at?
Yeah, so I'm going to use one where they're currently projected to win by about 4% on Brittany Lax, and I think, let me just see, I think Electoral Calculus are giving them really good odds as well, I think. So, yes, so there's a seat in there currently predicted, 41% chance for the Tories, 32% chance for, oh no, sorry, that's on the old seat. On the new seat, the Lib Dems have a 70% chance of winning, and it's a seat in Sussex, which is Horsham.
Ah, yeah.
For context, when you look at the members of Parliament for Horsham, They have been Conservative since 1880. And the last time that the Conservatives lost it at a general election was in 1868. They lost it in by-elections by 13 votes and 54 votes,
Wow.
in the 1870s, but they've consistently won it in general elections since the 1870s. And we're seeing the Lib Dems being given, a 70% chance of winning a seat like that by 10%. I think early on, if we're seeing seats like Horsham or East Grinstead or Mid Sussex going to the Lib Dems, like those three seats in that bit of Sussex and the seats in Surrey, if early on we see the Lib Dems taking them, I think they're definitely in for quite an impressive performance, because places like Sussex and Surrey, they didn't buck away much from the Tories. Famously in 1970, the Tories still won every seat in Surrey in 1997.
Oh, wow.
So if the Lib Dems perform as they're currently expected, which is to win 6 of the 12 seats in Surrey,
That's huge.
that's seismic. Previously they've only ever had one constituency in Surrey in recent years, and that was Guildford. So if they win 6 or potentially even 7 or 8, that's a truly seismic result that I think will point to a lot of success for them elsewhere in the country. And another seat that I think will be worth watching for, that will come in later in the night to see long-term possibility for the Lib Dems, is Sheffield Hallam, where they're very much,
To be taken off Labour, is that?
yeah, they're very much
Okay.
targeting the seat heavily. And with the
Interesting.
Tories having been on 25 to 30% of the vote in 2019, it's a seat that's expected to stay within a 2% margin between Labour and the Lib Dems.
Very interesting.
So if the Lib Dems take Sheffield Hallam, for instance, then long term we could see the Lib Dems start to pose a challenge in urban seats again to Labour, and that will definitely be an interesting one to watch at that point, I think.
Definitely, definitely. So we've looked at two parties who should have a good night. Let's turn back to a party which is expected to have a bit of a dismal night, the SNP.
Yeah.
So the last election, they won almost every seat in Scotland, am I right?
Yes. So the last election in Scotland, they won 48 of the 59 seats. So
Okay.
obviously not quite 2015, but still definitely the lion's share, including every seat but 2 in the infamous Central Belt.
And what are they expected to finish on by the end of Thursday night, Friday morning?
I think the expectation is that they're at around 20 or less.
So what's gone wrong for them?
I feel like they've almost got the same issue with the Tories. In Scotland now, they've been in government for 17 years. And when you look at that government, especially recently, it has really become quite humiliated, with Nicola Sturgeon being arrested, the former Treasurer being arrested, the former Chief Executive, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, being charged, in the embezzlement scandal. Then you had Humza Yousaf, you had all of the mess surrounding him. And I think the SNP's message has come back to bite them. Because 2015, especially, and 2019, they made a point of going across places like the Central Belt saying Labour's not going to win. Labour's not winning. So you need to vote for the SNP because we will stand up to the Tories. And that, as demonstrated by the election results, worked out quite well.
Mm-hmm.
But now they're trying to argue Labour is going to win anyway, so vote for us.
Okay.
And I feel like that's not washing with a lot of voters because I think a lot of voters can look and the option is, vote for an SNP MP who is going to be on the backbenches, or you vote for a Labour MP who is going to be on the government benches. And if Labour win even 20 seats in Scotland, and 20 or 30 seats in Scotland, a lot of those Scottish MPs then are guaranteed to become, at the very least, junior ministers. And what would you rather have? An MP on the backbenches of the opposition who can do nothing more but ask questions and shout, or have MPs that can be on the government benches in those Westminster government departments delivering things for Scotland. And I feel like that's where a lot of strength is coming for Labour at the moment, where they can win quite a few seats.
I also wanted to ask you about tactical voting in Scotland because I'm just trying to. Have there been any results to show if I'm a centre left, soft unionist, traditionally votes either Labour or Lib Dems, and I come up, I live in a seat where it's between the Tories and the SNP. Who am I voting for? You've got seats in Aberdeenshire and on the border where that's a situation. So,
Yes,
which way do they tend to side?
So it's a very good question, actually. So let me come to, if was a by-election actually in. So, for instance, in Arbroath, there was a by-election where the Conservative vote share was up 10%, Labour was up 10%, and the SNP was down 7%, where there was no independent. We look at, let me find it. It was a by-election in Berwickshire. Here we go. Jedburgh and District, which is in the Scottish borders.
Mm-hmm.
The Conservatives went from 50% up to 60% in this ward. Now, the SNP, and that was with Labour having not stood last time. Labour won, 10% of the first preference vote, but the Conservatives went up to win massively outright at 58.5%.
Mm.
So it seems like voters are still quite heavily voting tactically. Again, somewhere like Dunbridge and Bridge of Allen was a Conservative hold, down since 2023 by-election, but still up massively from the 2022 locals, whilst the SNP were down in both. What we seem to be seeing, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm correct in saying, let me look. Come back to the previous page again. The SNP have lost every single by-election they fought in the local election since 2022.
Oh, wow.
In Scotland, they are losing by-election after by-election after by-election. The last time, I mean, it's only council by-elections. However, the difference is with Scotland, obviously, they use STV. So it's ranked choice voting. But we're still seeing, Labour win, Tory win, Lib Dem win. The only consistent thing we're seeing at the moment is that the SNP is losing constantly. Like, here we go. So there was a by-election in Aberdeen, and this was in February 2023. No, their first preference vote was down to just 31%, and they lost it to Labour at the final stage. That was a ward that they'd gone into with 40% of the vote, and they lost.
Yeah.
They've lost pretty much every single by-election in a council ward since 2022. So the last one they won was in Murray, which was Douglas Ross's seat, and that was with 49% of the vote. But this was back in November 2022. So they've had, 18 months of consistent losses. And I think that's their problem. They've not got an electoral victory to point to. They don't really have any parliamentary successes to point to because, they're in a hung parliament where, the Greens aren't their best of friends at the minute. The Greens are standing a lot more parliamentary candidates than before. The Scottish Greens have really improved in terms of number of candidates. They're standing a slate of 44 candidates. So there's 44 Green candidates and there's 19 Alapa candidates. And I'd say the reason that's significant is that you look at 2019, the Greens didn't contest nearly as many seats as that. They got a total of 1% of the vote. They weren't contesting many seats at all. Whereas now, the SNP's got a big challenge to them with Alapa, with the Greens. That, nationalist vote is not solidified for them now. They are not holding an iron grip on the nationalist vote at this general election. It is fragmented. And I think a combination of a fragmenting nationalist vote combined with a coalescing unionist vote, unionist parties got the majority of the vote share in the 2019 election. It was 46% nationalist, 54% unionist. It seems like we're potentially looking at even 60% unionist vote share potentially coming up in Scotland. We're looking recent polls, Labour's on 37, the Tories on 14, the Lib Dems on 7, and then Reform on 8. You're looking 55% for unionists. Combine that with tactical voting, and that's potentially fatal for the SNP with the split that's happened.
So before we look at the smaller parties, so just some of the odds here. So the SNP to get under 20 seats is evens. I personally have backed the Tories to win West Aberdeenshire 6-4.